Part 1. The Unexpected News Happiness. My fiancée, Olivia Carter, found out she was pregnant that day. The entire family was ecstatic. Everyone surrounded her, already making plans and buying things for the baby. But Olivia, instead of sharing our excitement, seemed distant. She kept staring at her phone, typing non-stop. Finally, she clutched a receipt in her hand, looking conflicted, and hesitantly asked me, "Lucas, do you think Derek would be upset if he found out?" Derek. The name immediately soured my mood. He was her first love, the guy she once dated before we got together. They had been childhood friends, inseparable for years, and had even been in a relationship for a while. But things didn't work out, so they broke up. Even after that, they remained close, always staying in touch. I met Olivia long after she and Derek had ended things. I frowned, not understanding why she was bringing him up in such a moment of joy. A wave of jealousy surged inside me. I couldn't hold it back and snapped, "What does our life have to do with him?" Olivia, clearly upset with my reaction, suddenly threw the receipt in her hand onto the table and shouted, "What's with your attitude? I just found out I'm pregnant and this is how you treat me. If you're going to be like this, how can we even get married?" Her voice was loud enough that my mother rushed over, alarmed. "You two, don't fight. Olivia, you're pregnant. Stress isn't good for you," my mother pleaded. "Lucas, be more understanding." I sighed. I didn't want my mother to worry, so I simply nodded. "I understand, Mom." Meanwhile, Olivia avoided looking at me, her attention locked on her phone. Just as I turned away, deciding to apologize to her later, she suddenly grabbed my arm. Her hands trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "Lucas, something terrible has happened. Derek, he jumped from a building." On the way to the hospital, Olivia was a mess. Her face pale, her body shaking as she cried uncontrollably. "Derek, why did you do something so foolish?" she sobbed. I hadn't expected him to react this way. It turned out that Olivia had told him about her pregnancy and our upcoming wedding. She must have mentioned that we were engaged and set to marry in just 2 months. And he couldn't handle it. I sat in silence, torn between emotions. There was guilt, confusion, frustration, but most of all, exhaustion. Ever since we had been together, Olivia had never truly let go of Derek. She mentioned him often, too often. Every time I expressed jealousy, she would laugh it off, reassuring me, "Don't worry, Lucas. We weren't meant to be together. We're better off as friends." And like a fool, I believed her. I convinced myself that everyone has a past, that her lingering attachment to Derek was harmless. But now, Derek had jumped off a building. If he didn't survive, what would happen next? I wasn't sure if Olivia would ever truly move on. I wasn't sure if I could handle this anymore. As I sped toward the hospital, Olivia sobbed beside me. Yet, in my heart, the only thing I wanted was for Derek to survive. Because if he lived, maybe Olivia would finally stop thinking about him. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally have her all to myself. Part 2. The Breaking Point. The hospital hallway was crowded. Derek's friends were there. So were Olivia's. His parents stood at the end of the corridor, silent and grief-stricken. As I walked closer, I could hear muffled sobs. Some people had already cried so much that they had no more tears left. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling as if my breath had stopped. Derek was dead. Olivia's body trembled as she stepped forward. She hesitated, then slowly lifted the white sheet covering him. One glance was all it took. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I pressed my lips together, suppressing my emotions, and reached out to help her up. "Don't be too upset," I said gently. "You're pregnant. You have to take care of yourself." Before I could finish, she shoved me away forcefully and screamed, "Get out! It's all because of you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be pregnant. And Derek wouldn't be dead." Tears streamed down her face as she pointed at me, her voice filled with resentment. All because of me. Derek's friends turned their attention toward me. Some looked at me with blame, others with disdain. Some just stood by, watching the scene unfold, and a few, surprisingly, had a hint of sympathy in their eyes. A sharp pain ran through my chest. I wanted to ask her, Derek chose to do this himself. What does that have to do with me? But I knew saying it would only make things worse. So I swallowed my words. After a while, I stepped forward again and gently reached for her arm. Olivia, stand up. Derek is gone. Crying won't bring him back. She suddenly froze. Then her head snapped up, and she stared at me with a cold, hateful expression that sent a chill down my spine. Derek is dead. Are you happy now? She glanced down at her stomach. Then, out of nowhere, she raised her fist and slammed it against her belly. This cursed thing, it's all because of it. I'll get rid of it right now. Olivia, I panicked, grabbing her wrists. All right, it's my fault. Don't do this. Please, calm down. She thrashed in my grip, screaming, What's the point of keeping it? Ever since I got pregnant, everything has fallen apart. Let go of me. I have to get rid of it. The chaos was overwhelming. Derek's friends finally reacted, rushing over to restrain Olivia. Olivia, stop. Derek wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. She's right. Please, don't do anything rash. Slowly, I was pushed aside, left standing in the corner, watching as they surrounded Olivia, comforting her. I felt helpless. It hurt to see her in so much pain. But more than that, it hurt to realize that in this moment, I didn't matter to her at all. I was nothing more than a bystander. And maybe I always had been. A few days later, Olivia secretly went to a clinic and terminated the pregnancy. She didn't tell me directly. She simply texted me the address of the hospital. Lucas, I didn't keep the baby. It's gone. My mind went blank. My ears buzzed. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking I must have read it wrong. My mother had already bought a crib. She had carefully picked out baby clothes. I had arranged for Olivia to stay at a maternity care centre. But now, just like that, she was telling me it was over? I couldn't believe it. I grabbed my car keys and sprinted out the door, racing toward the hospital. Part 3. The breaking point. Olivia lay on the hospital bed, her face pale. But when she saw me, there was no emotion in her eyes. I was heartbroken for her, but at this point, I couldn't hold back my frustration any longer. I stepped forward, my voice filled with anger. Why did you do this? Why did you get rid of our baby? Derek is dead. What does that have to do with our child? I waited for an answer, but Olivia just started crying. Her voice trembled as she choked out, It's because of the baby that Derek jumped. How could I possibly keep it? Besides, we can always have another one. It's just one child. My heartbeat quickened, each pulse feeling like a vice tightening around my chest. What was she saying? That was our child. A life. How could she treat it like something disposable, something that could be thrown away so easily? My voice turned cold, laced with fury. What are you saying? Are you really willing to hurt me for him? Do you only care about him? What about me? We were supposed to get married. Unexpectedly, she grabbed the glass of water beside her and hurled it at me. Her expression was ice cold as she spat out, After all this, you still expect a wedding? You're so selfish. The glass shattered against the floor just like my heart at that moment. I should have known. The moment Derek jumped, I knew this was coming. She hadn't just gotten rid of the baby. She didn't even want to marry me anymore. But what about my parents? The invitations had already been sent. What about me? What the hell was I supposed to do now? It felt like a massive weight was pressing on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. I looked at Olivia's pale face and tried to tell myself to stay calm. Everything can still be fixed. I took a deep breath, forced my emotions down, and spoke as gently as I could. Olivia, I know you're in pain. The baby, it's already gone, and there's nothing we can do now. My mom, we can tell her it was just an accident. I'll take all the blame. But our wedding, it has to go on. We can't cancel it because of Derek. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, a bitter disappointment flashed in her eyes. Her chest rose and fell sharply as she seethed. Lucas, I never imagined you'd be this kind of person. Derek isn't even buried yet, and you're already forcing me to get married? I quickly tried to explain. But the wedding is still 2 months away. It's not like... She turned away, refusing to look at me. Tears rolled down her face, soaking into her hair. Then, she said something that made my blood run cold. If Derek saw me getting married, he wouldn't be happy. I want to mourn for him, for 3 years. The wedding can wait. I felt like I had been struck by lightning. What the hell are you saying? Mourn him? For 3 years? Are you insane? I took a step forward, my voice shaking. You and him were just friends. Why would you need to mourn for 3 years? I don't understand. She cut me off, her voice sharp and unwavering. I don't need you to understand. Her patience had run out. She turned her back to me, her voice chillingly calm. Starting today, I'm moving to the mountains. I won't get married. I won't see anyone. I'll live in solitude. Pray for Derek's soul. For 3 years. My mind went completely blank. Twice, I nearly stumbled as my legs threatened to give out. The wedding date was set. The invitations had been sent. And now she was telling me she wanted to mourn for another man, move to the mountains, and never get married. Part 4. A decision that shattered everything. Are you even listening to yourself? I was so furious that I couldn't speak. I wanted to yell at her, to shake some sense into her, but no words came out. I wanted to cry, but no tears would fall. I stood there, unable to sit, unable to move, unable to breathe. I had no idea how much time had passed when Olivia finally looked at me. Her gaze dropped to the floor as she spoke softly. I know this is hard for you to accept, but if you truly love someone, you have to be generous. I don't want to break up with you, Lucas. I just need 3 years. For these 3 years, I belong to him. After that, I'll come back and marry you. My mouth hung open, trying to form words, but before I could say anything, she continued coldly. Lucas, are you really going to compete with someone who's already dead? You're so petty. At that moment, something inside me snapped. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, sharp and cold. I took a deep breath, struggling to control my emotions. You might not care about me, but have you thought about my mother? She has been nothing but kind to you. If she hears this, do you know how heartbroken she'll be? Have you even considered that? Olivia's eyes darkened. A smirk curled on her lips. I knew it. You can't compare to Derek. When we fought, he never once forced me to consider his mother's feelings. It's clear now. Your mother is the only thing that matters to you. She clenched her jaw, her voice growing more determined. I have to mourn for Derek. No one can change my mind. If you say one more word, leave. After being discharged from the hospital, Olivia didn't even rest. She immediately began packing her things, preparing to leave. Her face was pale, and she looked weak, but her hands moved swiftly without hesitation. She spoke as she packed. I've already contacted an agent and rented a house in a small village up in the mountains. 3-year contract. Don't worry. Whether or not you're a decent person, I'll still marry you when I come back. Do you have to go? I asked, my voice lower now. I took slow steps toward her, softening my tone. That village doesn't have electricity, running water, or internet. How will you even survive there? Olivia, please, let Derek go. You still have your whole life ahead of you. But she showed no emotion, no reaction. Stop talking. I don't want to hear it. I knew at this point nothing I said would change her mind. I could only grip her hand, looking straight into her eyes. If you leave now, what do I tell my mother? She yanked her hand away, irritated. Then call her here. I'll tell her myself. I bit my lip, clenched my fists, and dialed my mother's number. 30 minutes later, my parents rushed over, their faces filled with worry. My mother stepped forward immediately. Olivia, what's going on? Where are you planning to go? Part 5. The Final Goodbye. Lucas, did you do something to upset Olivia again? My mother's voice was filled with concern. I let out a heavy sigh, glancing at Olivia. Her face was emotionless, but before she could say anything, I quickly cut in. I'll explain. I was afraid she would say something that would hurt my mother even more, so I kept it simple. I told them that the baby was gone and that Olivia wanted to cancel the wedding to mourn for Derek. The color drained from my father's face. He stumbled backward, collapsing onto the couch, looking like he had aged 10 years in an instant. My mother, frozen in place, nearly fainted. After a long silence, she finally took a deep breath and stepped forward. She reached for Olivia's hand, her eyes brimming with tears. Olivia, sweetheart, I know you're a good girl, but this just doesn't make sense. You and Derek were just friends. I understand that you're grieving, but cancelling the wedding and leaving home because of it? The baby is gone, and we're all heartbroken. But you still have a future. We care about you. As she spoke, she reached into her purse and pulled out a bank card, holding it out to Olivia. Olivia, I've always thought of you as my own daughter. If Lucas has done anything wrong, please don't be angry. Here's $10,000. Your body is weak right now. Use this to take care of yourself, to buy whatever you need to recover. I don't need it. Olivia slapped the card out of her hand, sending it flying across the floor. My mother nearly lost her balance from the force. I quickly rushed forward to steady her, fury surging through me. Olivia, if you're angry, then be angry at me, but don't take it out on my mother. She cast a cold glance at me before turning her sharp gaze back to my mother. You two are exactly the same. You're not upset because I want to mourn for Derek. You're just afraid of losing face in front of everyone. And now you're throwing money at me as if that'll fix everything? I called off the wedding. So what? Stop pretending to be so noble. Then she kicked the card further away. As if I need your money. I'll be in the mountains. There's nothing to spend it on anyway. Without another word, she grabbed her suitcase and walked toward the door. My father shot up from his seat, his face etched with worry. My mother, too overwhelmed to speak, clutched her chest, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. At that moment, I stopped caring about pride, about what anyone else thought. I only knew one thing. I had to stop her. I reached for her wrist, desperation in my voice. Olivia, please don't go. Look at me. Do I really mean nothing to you? She halted, but she didn't turn around. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Lucas, I know you've always been good to me, but I can't stay. Just wait for me. 3 years. I'll come back, and we'll get married. I watched her walk away, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. I had known this moment was coming. I had known she would never look back, because the truth was, her heart had never belonged to me. Slowly, I let go of her wrist, watching as she disappeared from sight. Just then, my father suddenly shouted, Your mother! I turned around in time to see my mother collapse to the floor. The hospital said she had fainted due to extreme emotional distress. Nothing too serious, but they wanted to keep her for observation for the next 2 days. I sat by her bedside, guilt eating away at me. This was all my fault. My fault for loving Olivia. My fault for not seeing her true colors sooner. My fault for dragging my mother into this mess with me. Beside me, my father placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice was tired but filled with warmth. Son, don't be afraid. No matter what happens, we'll always be here for you. He let out a long sigh before adding, I'll take care of everything. I'll let everyone know the wedding is cancelled. Then he turned to leave. But in my mind, a storm was brewing. Why? Why does my family have to be the ones suffering? Part 6. A New Beginning. This was unbelievable. Olivia had wanted to get married. My family had planned an extravagant wedding for her. And now, she didn't want it anymore, leaving my family to clean up the mess. We had treated her well, almost worshipped her. Yet, she was selfish, always thinking only of herself. Even something as serious as marriage, she could cancel it without a second thought. I recalled her last words before she left. 3 years. After 3 years, I'll come back and marry you. What did she take me for? Did she think I couldn't survive without her? The thought made me scoff. Without hesitation, I grabbed my father's hand. He looked at me in confusion as I spoke, my voice calm but firm. Dad, don't worry. The wedding will still happen. The only difference is, the bride will be someone else. Fueled by anger, I began going on blind dates. I only had one condition. We must get married within 2 months. As expected, things didn't go smoothly. For 2 weeks, I met 2 women every day. None of them were the right fit. My father tried to reason with me. Son, you can't rush something like this. Don't let your anger toward Olivia push you into a mistake you'll regret forever. I forced a smile to reassure him. I know, Dad, but I didn't stop. I went on date after date, refusing to reject anyone. Single mothers, divorcees, even women who had been married multiple times, but no one was willing to accept my urgency. Until I met her. A woman named Leah. Before leaving our first meeting, she looked at me and casually asked, "You seem normal enough. So why are you in such a hurry? You don't have health issues or anything, do you?" I let out a bitter chuckle. There was too much pain in my heart, too much frustration, too much I couldn't say. Instead, I told her everything, every painful detail about Olivia. She listened quietly, eyes focused on me the entire time. When I finished, she stared at me for a long moment before asking, "You said, Vietnamese people don't betray Vietnamese people, right?" I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, we don't betray our own." She smiled, but it was a smile that made me pause. I braced myself, expecting her to walk away or mock me like the others had, but instead, she asked something completely unexpected. "Lucas, how many women have you met on these dates?" I answered truthfully, 49. She raised an eyebrow, her eyes filled with playfulness and confidence. Then she grinned and laughed loudly. "Congratulations, Lucas. You've found the one." My heart just skipped a beat. And just like that, Leah stepped into my life, bringing light to a world that had been dark for too long. When I told my friends about it, no one believed me. "Dude, how the hell are you this lucky? A woman agreed to marry you in 2 months? A complete stranger?" Every time they asked, Leah would simply smile, her eyes gleaming with excitement, and say, "He's a good man." And every time I heard those words, my heart would pound just a little harder. She was nothing like Olivia. Leah was radiant, full of energy, alive. Sometimes I wondered if she had been sent by the universe to save me. Maybe she was an angel. And so, 2 months later, we got married. My parents adored her. Our relationship only grew stronger with time. She was calm, steady, and I learned to cherish her. Part 7. A Ghost from the Past. Leah and I never once had an argument. During this time, Olivia completely vanished from my life. She left in a hurry, without a trace, and little by little, my heart healed. I forgot all the pain she had caused me. Time passed quickly. 3 years later, Leah and I had a child. Our life was stable, happy. But then, one afternoon, Leah took our son to visit my mother. I stayed home, tidying up the house. That's when I heard a knock at the door. Thinking Leah had returned, I smiled as I went to open it. But standing outside was someone I never expected to see again. A woman with brittle blonde hair, hollow eyes, and a frail, gaunt frame. The moment she saw me, she threw herself into my arms, her voice trembling. "Lucas, I'm back." Hearing her voice, something shattered inside me. Olivia. 3 years had passed, and she had changed so much I barely recognized her. I instinctively pushed her away and took a step back. She looked pale and malnourished, her body weak, her voice raspy. probably from years of malnutrition and silence. "Lucas, don't you recognize me? It's me, Olivia." I nodded, unable to find the right words. After a moment of silence, I finally muttered, "Come in." She didn't even take off her shoes. Instead, she walked straight into my house and sat down on the couch like she still belonged here. Her demeanor, her mannerisms, it was as if she had turned into a completely different person. I poured her a glass of water. She took it and downed it in one gulp. "Lucas, do you have any idea how much I suffered these past 3 years? That village was unlivable. It was scorching hot in the summer, freezing in the winter. No air conditioning, no internet, no electricity. I had to go to bed at 8 o'clock every night because there was nothing else to do. And my phone? I could only use it for a few days before the battery died completely." She rambled on and on about her hardships, venting her frustrations. Then suddenly, as if she had just remembered something, she asked, "Oh, right. How's your mom doing?" I replied flatly, "She's fine." Relieved, Olivia let out a sigh and forced a smile. "That's good. That's really good." There was an awkward pause before she continued. "Since I'm back now, we should start preparing for our wedding, right? I know you've been waiting for me. I told you I wouldn't let you down. Look, the moment I came down from the mountains, I came straight to find you." She spoke with excitement, her voice filled with anticipation. She truly believed I had been waiting for her all this time, as if the past 3 years had never happened, as if nothing had changed. "Give me a minute," she suddenly said. "I'll go take a shower, then we can visit your mom together. She's at home, right?" I looked at her for a long time before finally replying, "She's probably busy taking care of her grandson." Olivia froze. She turned to face me, disbelief written all over her face. Her gaze flickered around the room. For the first time, she truly looked at her surroundings. And that's when she realized this house no longer belonged to her. There were signs of another woman everywhere. A pile of coffee cups stacked in the sink. A pair of women's slippers near the doorway. A framed wedding photo hanging on the wall. Children's toys scattered across the floor. As she took it all in, her face grew paler and paler. Her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Lucas, you got married?" Her voice trembled. You didn't wait for me?" I scoffed, crossing my arms over my chest. "When did I ever say I was going to wait for you?" Her eyes widened in panic. But we agreed. I was supposed to mourn for Derek for 3 years, and then we'd be together." Her words trailed off, because she finally realized the truth. I had never agreed to wait. She had she had decided that I would always be here for her, no matter what. But life doesn't stop for anyone, and hearts don't stay frozen in place. Just then, the front door opened. Leah had returned. She stopped in her tracks when she saw Olivia sitting on the couch. For a brief moment, she looked surprised. Then she smiled and turned to me. "So, who's this?" Part 8. The truth. She refused to accept my love. "Is this a friend of yours?" Leah's voice was light-hearted as she entered the house. Instead of answering, I asked, "Where's our son?" She slipped off her shoes and smiled. Mom wanted him to stay over for a few days. She can't bear to be apart from him. Our conversation was warm, natural, just like always. But Olivia, she stood there, frozen, her face drained of all color, looking as if she might collapse at any moment. As Leah walked up to me, she shot me a look, signaling me to introduce them. I spoke casually. "Leah, this is Olivia, my ex, the one who spent 3 years mourning her one true love on a mountaintop." Leah and Olivia locked eyes. Leah's gaze was filled with amusement, perhaps even mockery. Olivia, on the other hand, looked away. But there was something burning beneath her expression. Resentment. Suddenly, she shot up from the couch, her voice sharp and desperate. "Lucas, you're lying to me, right? You're just angry, so you found some random woman to pretend to be your wife and make me jealous? Right?" I raised an eyebrow, speaking slowly. Sorry to disappoint you, but I nearly forgot you even existed. 3 years. Not too long, not too short. But I've been happy." Her breath hitched. "No, that's impossible." She cut me off, her voice trembling with fury. "You love me." "I know you do. She must be an actress. How much did you pay her?" "Whatever it is, I'll pay double. Just tell her to leave." Leah burst into laughter. She laughed for so long that Olivia's face turned an even paler shade. Finally, Leah shook her head and smirked. "Before I met you, I was curious about what kind of woman you were. Turns out, you're exactly as awful as I imagined." Olivia couldn't even form a response. Her eyes darted to me, pleading silently. But I didn't care. I let out a long sigh and turned to Leah. "I wasn't lying to you. At that time, I truly had no way out. But I'm lucky that I met you." Leah stepped forward, cupped my face in her hands, and kissed me in front of Olivia. Then, without another glance at her, she walked toward the bedroom. Moments later, she returned, holding 2 red booklets. She waved them in front of Olivia with a triumphant smile. "We're married. No one can wait for you forever. You love your one true love so much. Go back to him and leave Lucas alone." She turned to put the marriage certificates away. But Olivia suddenly lunged forward, grabbing them and ripping them into shreds. "You're showing off, aren't you? When Lucas was begging me to marry him, you didn't even exist." Leah stood there, momentarily stunned. I, however, rose to my feet, my gaze darkening as I looked at the torn pieces on the floor. "Are you insane? 3 years in the mountains turned you into a bitter, spiteful woman." Her tears finally fell, streaming down her face. She reached out to grab my hand. "Lucas, how could you marry someone else? I never agreed. I never agreed to this." I took a step back, disgusted. She reached out again, but this time she missed. The color drained from her face as she started panicking. Then her voice softened as she whined, "I don't care. Get a divorce. Right now. You can only be with me." I met her gaze, my face devoid of emotion. My voice was ice cold. "Get out of my house. Now, if you don't, I will throw you out myself." Tears welled up in her eyes. She shook her head frantically. "But where am I supposed to go?" Part 9. Desperation. I have nowhere to go. Just as those words left Olivia's lips, Leah suddenly stepped forward and shoved her back. "I don't care where you go, as long as it's not here." With just a few quick moves, Olivia, frail and weak from years of self-imposed suffering, was easily forced out of the house. She was nothing but skin and bones now. There was no way she could fight back. Leah scoffed and slammed the door shut. Then, turning to me, she crossed her arms and said coolly, "You should have thrown her out faster." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I don't make a habit of laying hands on women." She rolled her eyes and glanced at the shredded marriage certificates on the floor. "Well, have fun dealing with that mess." And with that, she disappeared into the bedroom. I let out another long sigh. Now I had to calm her down too. It took me over an hour to carefully tape the marriage certificates back together. Then I immediately went to find Leah. Luckily, she was easy to pacify. A little jealous, maybe, but she cooled off quickly. I reassured her, promising that I would never see Olivia again. But just as the tension had finally settled, my phone suddenly rang. It was my mother. The moment I heard the ringtone, my heart clenched. I had a bad feeling. I picked up the call. Her voice was sharp with frustration. "Lucas, get home now. Olivia is here, making a scene. I can't take this anymore." Leah's expression darkened. "What now?" I frowned, hanging up the phone and sighing. "She's at my parents' house. I need to go see what she's up to." By the time I arrived, I could already hear Olivia's wailing from outside. "Auntie, please, I beg you, talk to Lucas for me. I have nothing left. I can't lose him too. Didn't you once say you saw me as your own daughter? Please, don't turn your back on me now." My mother's voice was filled with exhaustion. Causing a scene here won't change anything. 3 years ago, I begged you not to leave, but you did. And now you have the audacity to come back and demand my son? My son and his wife are happy? Leave them alone." At that moment, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. Olivia was gripping my mother's arm so tightly that her knuckles turned white. My father stood nearby, sighing deeply, knowing it wasn't his place to interfere. The moment Olivia saw me, her entire demeanor changed. Her eyes filled with hostility as she turned her glare toward Leah. Pointing at her, she snapped, "Who let you in here? This is my aunt's house. Get out." Seeing that her emotions were spiraling out of control, I immediately stepped in front of Leah, shielding her from Olivia's madness. But I was done playing nice. The woman standing before me was no longer the Olivia I once loved. Now, all I felt for her was disgust. Coldly, I said, "Olivia, let go of my mother." But instead of obeying, she clung even tighter, her desperation growing. Her voice cracked as she pleaded, "Lucas, can't you divorce her? I'm back now. We're supposed to be together." Tears streamed down her face as she continued, "Did you really forget? Our baby, our wedding, everything we planned. Did you forget it all?" Part 10. The End of a Nightmare. "You told me you would love me forever." Her voice cracked as she sobbed. "They don't want me anymore. But you can't abandon me too." Her cries filled the room, but she was blind to how my face had darkened, how my patience had completely worn thin. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to hate someone. I looked at her, her tear-streaked face, her trembling body, and felt nothing but exhaustion, frustration, disgust. What had I ever seen in her? She had never been good to me. She had never loved me the way I loved her. She had spent all these years chasing after a ghost, while I had been the fool waiting for her to wake up. If only I'd let go sooner. Maybe things wouldn't have turned out like this, but it was too late for regrets now. Even as she pleaded, her voice desperate, "I was wrong before. I didn't think about your feelings. If I had another chance, I would never make the same mistake again. It's my fault. I gave all my love to someone who was already gone and hurt the one who was still here. I'm sorry. Please, Lucas, please forgive me." She wept, her whole body shaking as she reached for me. She looked just like me back then, back when I had given up everything, my pride, my dignity, for her. But I simply shook my head. "I will never forgive you." And with that, I pulled out my phone and called the police. They arrived soon after and escorted Olivia away. As I walked home with Leah, I thought to myself, this time, she won't be coming back. It had been a long, exhausting day. Leah was unusually quiet. I understood why. Gently, I reassured her, "She's gone now. She won't come back. It's over." Leah turned to look at me, her eyes welling up with tears. I frowned. "What's wrong?" She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around me. Her voice was muffled against my chest. "I just feel bad for you. You're such a good person, Lucas." And she never appreciated that. It must have hurt so much when she left. I keep thinking, if only I'd met you earlier, maybe you wouldn't have had to go through all of this alone. Her words sent warmth through my chest. I held her close and smiled softly. "Don't cry. You're here now. And that's all that matters." 2 days later, the police called me again. They told me Olivia hadn't eaten or drunk anything since being taken in. She kept repeating my name over and over again. Concerned, they had her evaluated. The doctors concluded that her mental state had deteriorated beyond repair. 3 years of isolation, emotional instability and prolonged stress had broken her completely. She was diagnosed with severe psychosis. She wouldn't recover. The officer on the phone asked, "Mr. Hayes, what would you like us to do?" I didn't hesitate. Commit her to a psychiatric hospital. 1 year later, I received another call. It was the police again. Olivia had passed away. Her body had been weak for years. 2 months prior, Her condition had taken a turn for the worse. When I heard the news, my heart clenched for just a brief moment. Then, almost instantly, the feeling faded. Leah glanced at me. "Do you want to go see her one last time?" I shook my head. I was never her lover. There's no reason for me to attend her funeral. Leah chuckled. "You're so cold-hearted." I reached into the drawer and pulled out our old, tattered marriage certificate, the one Olivia had torn apart. Looking at Leah, I said, "I only want to be gentle with the woman I love." Sunlight streamed into the room, casting a glow over the faded document. Leah squeezed my hand and whispered, "Let's go get a new one. Together." I smiled and tucked the old certificate away. Then I pulled her into my arms. Happiness was right here, in front of me. And from this moment on, everything that once brought me pain would vanish like smoke in the wind.
Thank you for watching. Your support means everything. Like, share and subscribe for more stories. See you in the next video.